Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to Arts Richmond Wednesday's Talking Lockdown. I will now hand you over to Arts Richmond's President, Sir Vince Cable. Thank you.
Well, could I add a warm welcome, and particularly many of you are back for the second time. That's great to see. And thanks to Art Richmond, who've taken the initiative in helping people to get up to date with what's actually happening in the arts in Richmond, and particularly Sue Pandit, Hilary Dodman, who've done a lot of the background work to make all this possible. I just want to give a brief sketch of the panel tonight, and they'll get a more detailed introduction later. But starting with Geeta Gurumurthy, who made the jump from being a biochemist to a broadcaster and has extensive experience with many aspects of broadcasting, and a very formidable interviewer. I've been on the receiving end, so I could confirm that, and also makes, and I can confirm, an excellent curry. Sophie Denny, who is the director of Richmond Theatre, had almost a decade of major role theatre management in the West End and the provinces, came to take over the management of the Richmond Theatre almost 2 years ago, in good time to inherit the problems of the pandemic, and she'll explain to us how the theatre, which is a sort of pride and joy of the borough, is actually coping with that. And then Nick George, who chaired proceedings last week, and he's made the jump from being a music technology entrepreneur, startup company, quite famous in its way in management schools, and he made the jump to running his own opera company, which has been a great success, and has prospects of bringing opera to the suburbs. I'm sure we're very keen to hear from him how he's actually going to do it. And not least, Roger Mcgough, who I think is, I'm certainly known to everybody on this call from his poetry, live on Poetry Please, and many of them have heard him giving his poetry recitals in the borough. It's a great treat. What I hadn't realised was that he was the author of the Scapels Lily the Pink, which was one of the kind of defining moments of our adolescence, I seem to remember, and also has a very distinguished career in film scripts, animation, theatre, and is a multi-talented man. And we look forward very much to hearing from them. But over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sir Vince. Thank you. My name is Hilary Dodman, and I'm chairing this evening because our illustrious chairman of Arts Richmond is actually one of our speakers tonight. I'm looking forward very much indeed to his contribution. This is one of a series of 3 evenings of Talking Lockdown, and this is the second one, the third one next Wednesday, and we hope very much that you will come along to that next week. We're trying to imagine that we have a real platform, and we invite our speakers to come onto the platform to speak to you. So we're doing our very best to imagine you, our live audience, sitting there listening and watching. So thank you very much indeed for coming. Can I suggest that if you wish to ask a question of one of our panelists, or at any time during the evening, you can use the Q&A function on your Zoom to send in the questions to us. And at the end, when all 4 speakers have finished, we'll have a plenary, and I'll pose questions to them that you have sent. It's probably best, and it's up to you, but you can use the speaker view for when our speakers are actually delivering their talk, which each of them has about 15 minutes to do that, and perhaps use gallery view when we go back to the questions at the end, and you'll be able to see all members of our panel at once. So without more ado, I'd like to invite our first speaker. Let me just tell you, first of all, in addition to the words of Vincent about Gita, that she was born in Liverpool and brought up in West Bradford, which is not in Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, but is in Lancashire, in the Trough of Bowland, a wonderful part of the world. She was involved with orchestras, theatres and choirs before going on to study biochemistry and later changed careers. She was a reporter for the BBC regional news programme, BBC Look North, before moving to 5 News. In January 1998, Gita covered the breaking of the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal from Champaign, Illinois for 5 News. And by 2002, she was hosting Asia Today with regular work for BBC World, BBC News 24, BBC Breakfast, and by 2005, presenting the news on BBC Radio 4. She is currently presenter for BBC World TV News and the News Channel. She's presented the Today programme, Breakfast TV, Daily Politics, and Panorama. And in 2017, Gita was one of the several female BBC employees campaigning against the gender pay gap. She tells us that her private passions are politics and opera. So could I now invite you, Gita, to come to our virtual platform? Thank you.
Thank you both very much indeed for that very generous introduction. And yes, I've been in my role as a reporter and a presenter for a quarter of a century or so, which feels like a very long time. And yet it is absolutely obvious, I think, to everybody that COVID is the story of our lifetimes for all of us. And I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about what the pandemic has felt like and looked like from someone trying to tell part of the story, being part of a big newsroom involved in that. Just to begin with, in the search for a bit of inspiration today to describe what it's been like covering such an amazing story, I thought I would turn to the words from my very esteemed fellow panellist, Roger Mcgough. I hope these are your words, Roger. Every day I think about dying, about disease, starvation, violence, terrorism, war, the end of the world. It helps keep my mind off things. That is almost a summary of what it's been like working for BBC World, which I joined at the start of 9/11. It's been a very dramatic 20 years, but the last year and a half obviously has been extraordinary and very difficult to encapsulate in words. So I thought I'd try and explain it in 3 periods, 3 days, and 3 periods within the last few months. And there are a couple of medium-sized conclusions. The first time was very early in January, when I really remember those first moments of reading on the news agencies, news of a new mystery illness that was emerging, that a few people had lost their lives to it in a town that we'd barely heard of, a city we'd barely heard of, called Wuhan. At the time, it felt to me like this was like Ebola, something that was very serious, disturbing, important, but still, from the UK point of view, distant. That soon changed when it emerged that, of course, this virus could spread from human to human. Wuhan was being closed down. It was obvious something serious was in the air, quite literally, as it turned out. And of course, as the World Health Organization declared a global pandemic and the severity of the problem became apparent, we felt in the newsroom, I think many of us, that we had twin responsibilities. We had to tell the story, but like everybody else, we were also worried about our own safety. How safe was it to be in a crowded newsroom? Were the surfaces contaminated? Were we breathing illness over one another? Newsrooms are busy, vibrant places, and they need those very quick, casual group conversations which generate leads that turn into ideas for items and guest ideas. But by March, of course, we were being locked down. The newsroom was almost empty. There were arrows pointing the way to walk on the carpet, and only those of us who had to be there were allowed to go in. And that did not include makeup artists, which for presenters was quite something. We had no guests in the studio. Reporters were largely confined to their bedrooms to talk to us on Zoom. I think we adapted well, probably much better than any of us had ever thought possible. The two TV stations that I present for are BBC World, which obviously faces internationally, and the News Channel, which is the rolling news channel that you see here. And we merged the output largely in order to minimise the teams that had to come into the studio, the directors, the number of galleries, the floor managers, everything. We had to slim it right down and took some programmes off air completely. Obviously, we couldn't get guests into studios around the country or around the world in the same way that we normally would. And that was very limiting, but it's also what this taught us, that we were able to speak to people in places that we never would normally, because we spoke to them on Skype, on FaceTime, on Zoom. And I spoke on air to doctors, nurses, scientists, pub and restaurant owners, parents, teachers, who all told us of their fears and anxieties. And our data and reality check teams tracked the global surges. Our coverage was shown on BBC One and BBC Two. Obviously, the news became required viewing because so many people, and we covered the then novelty of daily government briefings from the Prime Minister and the First Ministers of Scotland and Wales. It was all pretty frightening and strange, and of course also gripping to be a part of. It was clear that this was a once-in-a-lifetime event, or at least we certainly hope that is the case. And to be there helping to tell the story was an enormous privilege, and it reminded me yet again that I'm in a job that I still absolutely love doing. And that brings me in a way to the second day, which was the second lockdown. So spool through the spring, the opening up a bit of the summer, and then everything starts to get more difficult again at the autumn, at the end of October, Halloween to be precise. And it was clear that the numbers were going up of infections, and it was clear that something big was coming. And being on air that day brought home again the power of broadcasting, because if you might remember, the announcement had been leaked, the plans were all over the morning's papers. We were expecting an announcement in the coming days, but it was clear the announcement had to be brought forward. I was on air just before it all was public, but overall we knew that we had huge audiences that day, 8 million I think just for the news channel, and that has been a pattern that we saw throughout the pandemic globally, so including BBC World, the World Service, online, social media. The numbers last summer showed that the reach of the BBC in 2020 increased by 11% to 468.2 million people a week. And I think that is the highest number that was recorded at that point. That was July last year. It might have even been higher later in the year, I'm not sure. In March 2020, certainly at the beginning of the pandemic peak, the BBC News recording shows the highest reach of any international news media in the world, with 310 people accessing coverage at that point. And during the height again of the pandemic, world TV alone reached 112 million people. It wasn't just the pandemic either, which saw huge audiences coming to us. I was on air on the day that the official verdict in November was that the new US president would be Joe Biden. I was on air again just before that was all confirmed. And I was on air for the third big day that I wanted to mention, which was Christmas Eve 2020. We'd been waiting for the Brexit deal for what seemed like forever. We had a strong sense, of course, that a deal was coming. We didn't know quite when. On the 24th, I went into work as usual and was told to prepare for a BBC One news flash mid-morning because we thought it might be coming. We were all set. Laura Koonsberg came on to do an update for the lunchtime BBC One news bulletin with me. And surely if Laura says something is on, then, you know, it's pretty much set to happen. But again, the deadlines were pushed back again and again. And in the end, I just missed the announcement. The deal was confirmed in the afternoon just after I'd handed over to a colleague. But that third day, when we were doing interviews with people to really try and sum up how we all felt that the idea that a Brexit deal was finally happening, dramatised in a way the first of two themes that I just wanted to end with. And that is that there have been, of course, plenty of other stories in the last year or so. George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter marches, the US presidential election, the continuing saga of UK politics and Brexit. But there is no doubt that stories which would have otherwise made it to a prominent place in the order of the news bulletins have not had the coverage that they would have otherwise received. I'm sure Sir Vince has been throwing objects at the television as the new leader of the Liberal Democrats has struggled to find a place in the schedules. The pandemic has just been a huge, overwhelming story in its own right. And it's also imposed massive logistical difficulties in telling other stories. We couldn't deploy reporters in the usual way, for example, to the US elections. We have used plenty of user-generated content, which is material filmed by the public, and then we verify it. But of course, it's never a substitute for us actually filming on the ground ourselves. And it is not just the methods of the BBC that have had to adapt, because my final point is that our purpose, I think, has had to shift a bit too. The BBC is, of course, designed to shed light on the news, to ensure that power is exercised in the clear light. But as a public service broadcaster, we've had another purpose, which became very clear in the pandemic. We are a national institution, a trusted and reliable source of information, and that has made us a vital tribune for information in a moment when reliable information could be a matter of life and death. We had to do two things at once: to relay the information whilst also interrogating it. I hope that the way that we did so underlines the huge value of a trusted and balanced news source. Certainly the audiences seem to feel so. And in an era of polarized debate, of fake news, and the challenge from news organizations that want to step around the stringent demands of impartiality, I think there is a premium on reliability, truth, and trust. £159 a year seems to me a price worth paying for that trust and reliability. I know I might be predicted to say that, but I hope that the pandemic has reminded us of the case for the BBC, something that is valued in this country and around the world. It has certainly been a huge privilege for me to be there at this time, and it's not a period that any of us will look back on with fondness. We are all hoping to see it pass. I suspect there's much more to come, sadly, in the next year. It's without doubt a period that is going to last in the memories of all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Geeta. Extraordinary listening to you, how one's mind goes back to those early days and just thinking, you mentioned it was frightening, and I think that's absolutely true. And such times that we have lived through in the last few months, and I certainly have depended enormously on the information stream from the BBC. So I'm sure there'll be questions for Geeta, so please do post them in our Q&A area on the Zoom. And meanwhile, we move on to our second speaker this evening. This is Sophie Denny. And Sophie is the theatre director at Richmond Theatre, which is part of the Ambassador Theatre Group. She joined the organisation 9 years ago and has worked across an array of regional and West End theatres, building a wealth of knowledge and experience of commercial theatre. She joined the Richmond team in 2019 in the middle of their £2 million refurbishment closure, reopening the venue in the autumn of the same year. And since this reopening, she and the team have enjoyed the highs of a successful pantomime season and record-breaking week-long shows, to the immense low of the sudden closure of the theatre on Monday, the 16th of March last year. Sophie will talk us through how she's navigated through the past 13 months and the impacts of COVID, not only on Richmond Theatre and her team, but on the theatre industry as a whole. So could I now invite you, Sophie, to our virtual platform? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hilary, and a big thank you to Arts Richmond for organising this event so that I can share with you the journey that Richmond Theatre's gone through during this pandemic. I too remember very, very clearly the evening of March the 16th and being given the information that Richmond Theatre would be shutting. And at that stage, it was for an initial 2-week period. And it actually was quite a shock to most of the team. In our industry, we really do live by the motto, the show must go on. So cancelling shows for 2 weeks is really unheard of. Looking back at everything in the past 14 months, I'm actually almost slightly embarrassed to admit that I truly did believe that it might only last a couple of weeks or months. but I certainly wasn't alone in that thinking. We're now 61 weeks later, and sadly Richmond Theatre still remains shut. I start by mentioning this just as a way to sort of frame the year, for all of us to remember that actually we never planned to be shut this long. You know, most arts organisations have spent this year planning their reopening almost 10 times over, forever hopeful that we wouldn't still be in this position. But it does feel promising that the current reopening plan for the theatre will be the last one that I write. As many of you know, Richmond is run by the Ambassador Theatre Group. So ATG, we are owned by a private equity firm, so that makes it a commercial theatre operator. Means we don't gain any sort of funding through the Arts Council or any other means. I'm personally really proud of the way that ATG have dealt with the pandemic, especially considering, as I say, that we are a profit organisation. The approach for the business has always been around survival, being in the best position to bounce back as quickly as possible. And our focus for the theatre has been about the team, the building, and most importantly, our audiences. So in March last year, I actually went from having a thriving team of 109 staff, and within a few weeks, they were all put on furlough. ATG has continued to keep all of those 109 individuals employed throughout the pandemic, obviously with the support of the government JRS scheme. But that's not actually a choice that all operators made. This has not only given the team great relief of knowing that their jobs are safe, but it's a huge boost for the theatre moving forward, just allowing us to retain those sort of skill sets, the knowledge and the passion of our full workforce for once we reopen. A large amount of my time this year has been in the building, trying to maintain it. It's certainly not a large area of my expertise in my normal role. You all must know that it's a beautiful Frank Matcham building. I can assure you that 121-year-old buildings are not easy to maintain during normal circumstances, let alone during a pandemic. I've personally learned a lot about water schematics, alarm systems, and I've probably dealt with a fair few little floods as well along the way. The venues benefited from council rates relief, which has been brilliant, but operating costs for these buildings are really high. And again, I'm really grateful that ATG has continued to take these costs on board and has a belief that the industry will prevail in the long run once we're all back on our feet. I don't think we really know yet how many theatres will come out of this pandemic standing. Richmond Theatre didn't directly benefit from the Cultural Recovery Fund, but sister venues in the organisation have, and I know that it's been such a lifeline for so many venues, companies, and just individuals within the sort of arts industry. But honestly, this might not be enough. And although venues might open and companies might start again, the true impact of the pandemic, I don't think will fully be seen for months, if not years, within our industry. And then the most important part, all of you, our loyal audiences who come back week after week to see the product that we put on our stage. A great victory for the theatre has been that over 85% of the shows we lost due to the pandemic weren't actually lost. We've been working really closely with our producers to move these into future dates so that everyone can come and see the shows that they wanted to. I know personally the excitement of being mere weeks away from using rescheduled tickets that I booked is really encouraging and making me want to go back and buy more tickets in the live industry and theatre and just in the arts in general. Our audiences have been extremely accommodating to the changes with tickets, and it's been a great benefit that so many individuals have taken vouchers and swapped tickets into the future shows. Our systems just were not made to automatically refund patrons. I mean, it wouldn't have been the case if we had 800 tickets, yet alone the overnight requirement in this area for millions of tickets across the whole of the estate of ATG. So anyone who's listening right now, if you've been patient and waited for the shows to reschedule, from the bottom of my heart, I truly thank you. It really has been one of the main reasons that Richmond Theatre has been able to continue on. A large focus during the pandemic has understandably been on mental health for all of us, but there has been a real focus on younger generations and how they've dealt with the year, but also how they'll deal with the repercussions of this in years to come. Richmond Theatre is really fortunate to have the support of Richmond Theatre Trust. They are an independent charitable organisation that enable us to put projects on within the community. They allowed us to bring back our creative learning and partnerships officer towards the sort of latter end of the summer last year. And she was able to deliver our Young Theatre Makers course, which was in partnership with Richmond Parish Lands Charity, which brought one of our sort of pre-COVID projects onto the world of Zoom. Sadly, our Creative Learning and Community Partnerships Officer left the theatre soon after the project, and in the current climate, we just weren't able to rehire. But it was a really successful way to offer creative skills and positive well-being to young individuals who are possibly not getting it other ways. I'm sure many of you have, similar to I, reflected on this time during the pandemic and tried to gain sort of learnings from it and put it into a sort of pandemic continuity plan in our minds. For me, creative learning projects would certainly be top of my agenda. It would have been really great to offer more of these projects and utilise the skills of our freelance team, who, let's remember, have sort of fallen through the cracks during this period, and bring joy and escapism to many. As Geeta referred to earlier, I think technology has really helped us, and I've gained some great relationships with arts organisations and individuals in the borough this year, which I think could mean that we would have a bit more of a joined up approach around this topic, and could have potentially offered sort of a greater delivery than just what Richmond Theatre could have achieved on its own with our resources. But certainly that's an aim for me to look at in the future, and certainly something that as we grow our creative learning department in the venue in the coming years. So coming years, let's talk about the future. So nice to finally be able to do that. So Richmond Theatre will reopen in 2021. And the fact that I can say that with so much confidence is really quite phenomenal. Our focus now is about getting the venue and the team back to the highest levels of service for the day when you all walk back through our doors. We're aiming to open cashless and potentially with staggered entry times, and we're still working on the assumption that some of the guidelines will remain in place. Therefore, things like one-way systems and extended cleaning schedules are still being worked into our reopening plans. Our opening season is starting to take real form, and I hope you've seen some of the shows that we have on offer, with some sort of final additions to come over the next coming weeks. Two in particular that I'm extremely happy we scheduled is The Dresser, which comes to us on the 26th of October for a week, and that's starring Julian Clary and Matthew Kelly. And then Private Lives, which stars Nigel Havers and Patricia Hodge, which comes to us in November, a few weeks before our pantomime season starts. Richmond Theatre's always has been known for having really successful pantomimes, and I know not being able to deliver one last year was really tough for everyone. Many of my team mentioned that Christmas without a pantomime felt unreal. And seeing actually that 92% of our pantomime bookers for 2020 have retained their tickets for 2021, I think just is lovely to see that I think everyone else felt exactly the same. And I personally can't wait to enjoy a completely new sort of magic of pantomime with everyone from the 1st of December. My final point, and I don't think I'd be doing my job if I didn't say it, is actually a bit of a plea to everyone and to any of the audiences listening now. And that's just, as I mentioned earlier, that I simply can't do this without you. So, you know, if pre-pandemic you enjoyed coming to the theatre a few times a year, please support all theatres by coming just a few extra times more. Try to remember that feeling you get at 7:30 when the lights go down before a show. But more than anything, remember that just nothing this year has been able to really replace that. No. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to answering any questions later.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Sophie. I think you're right. It's the excitement of the moment, isn't it, when the lights go down and there we are at the theatre, enjoying something with an awful lot of other people as a kind of collective experience. Especially looking forward to those two productions you mentioned later in the year. I think they will definitely have enormous audiences if we are able to be there. So let's move on to our third speaker this evening. And our third speaker is Nick George, who is the current chair of Arts Richmond. but Nick's other life is running his opera company, Instant Opera. Nick was born and grew up in Richmond and found his way to producing operas via a circuitous route. In the 90s, he founded Way Out West, a music technology business based in Richmond, which grew rapidly to boast a national client list, including a who's who of international recording artists, many of them also based in or around Richmond, including Elton John, The Who, the Rolling Stones, Queen, Pink Floyd, and Blur. During this period, he also refounded Richmond's legendary Crawdaddy Club at its original old railway hotel location, which thrived until the pub premises were sold for development. Nick's business achievements were sufficient to gain him entry to Cranfield, a leading UK business school, where his startup enterprise became the subject of a course-assessed case study for students studying for the entrepreneurial elective. Following this academic sojourn, Nick finally got himself a respectable job as a senior consultant, and found himself managing programs in various central government departments until the credit crunch came along, and after the meltdown, working for investment banks. Although he can't help feeling that in a more rational world, it really should have been the other way around. However, Nick's entrepreneurial and arts genes both continue to exert a strong gravitational pull. And so rather than learn to play a relaxing game of golf, like most conventional overstressed management executives, in 2017, he decided to start an opera company. 20 sold out performances later, Instant Opera is without doubt now putting Richmond on the opera map. So without further ado, could I invite Nick George to our virtual platform for his talk this evening. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Hilary. Thank you very much. And good evening and welcome, everyone. As this talk is really about Instant Opera, I'm entitling it Talking Lockdown and Unlocking Potential. A lot of potential for Richmond and the art scene in general. So I must tell you that producing fully staged opera is a precarious and time-consuming business at the best of times. What started as a whim for us is really a one-off performance with friends of Mozart's Marriage of Figaro in October 2016, then has unleashed a frantic burst of activity, which, as Hilary said, 20 sold-out performances, and 3 years later evolved into Instant Opera. But looking back on those 3 years, which were prior to lockdown, it seems unbelievable, almost surreal, to review the highlights of what we managed to achieve in numbers alone. And it very much is a team effort, fully staged 4 in-theatre opera productions with orchestra performing their original language with surtitles. Following the Marriage of Figaro, we then tackled the remainder of the Mozart da Ponte opera trilogy, Don Giovanni, which earned us a 5-star review, and then Così fan tutte. All those works are 3-hour epics, by the way. And most recently, our last production was Puccini's La Bohème. We also put on 2 full revivals of 2 of those operas, which is almost as much work as putting on the original shows. In addition to that, we've hosted 6 fundraising opera galas with orchestra, 4 of those with a narrator, and the galas also included 2 cultural outreach events with the Korean London Community Singers, one held in Eastbourne Town Hall, which was our only performance to date outside Richmond. And then finally, if that wasn't enough, we designed and delivered 2 school educational workshop day events, each day comprised of a different opera in 2 formats, one tailored for the children, and then with a narrator, and then another version for their parents in the evening, a kind of full-on version. And all that was in 3 years, which I suppose we should now refer to as a time before COVID. Now, 2020 would have been our biggest and busiest year, but the pandemic had other ideas and caused us to cancel 3 events over 6 months: our Spring Opera Gala, a revival of our last production of La Bohème, and a brand new fully staged production. looking ahead, post-lockdown, we are now close to confirming new dates for all 3 of these postponed events, starting with the gala in September of this year, and then La Bohème, hopefully in January of 2022, next year, and then our new production, which we shelved last in 2020, for later on that year in 2022. So again, echoing Sophie's plea, we can't do it without you. So please, if you like opera, and we're hoping that some in our audience do, I know at least one of our panelists do now, Gita, but please do check our website for dates and details, www.instantopera.co.uk. But opera is a precarious business, even when there's no lockdown to talk about, and the constant presence, or more accurately, the lack of presence, is sourcing funding. And as any company from the Royal Opera House downward will testify. But the Royal Opera House, as one would rightly expect, receives a handsome 25 million annual public subsidy and at least as much again in private donations. While Instant Opera and many up-and-coming performing and fringe companies like us managed to fall between all the Cultural Recovery Fund stalls created by the government, unfortunately, and local authorities, and we were apparently entitled to nothing. All our productions and events to date have been self-funded, and despite all of them without exception having sold out, they typically result in a small surplus for our galas, and in the case of our full productions, so far, thankfully, containable losses. Rehearsal time is one of the main culprits for the hefty cost of producing opera, with a full production typically requiring 50 hours in rehearsal room for every hour presented on stage, plus rehearsal time for the orchestra. Costume, lighting and venue hire also make sizable dents into our budget, and the total expenditure for each fully staged production easily reaches well into 5 figures. Every production in a year is a year's planning, a full-on project management exercise, which I was doing as a day job, only in this case with rigidly fixed delivery dates and no budget extensions. So in many ways, it's one of the hardest project management exercises I've done involved with anywhere. And even on the credit side of the balance sheet, even then we are constrained by the small size of the venues that we can realistically afford at the moment, which means that very often there is almost as many performers as there are audience members. 80 performers playing to 120 members of the audience, for example, in our last production of La Bohème. And that makes our balance sheet very hard to balance in our favour. So, why do we do it? After I wrote all this down, I went blank and I nearly forgot why. And then I also remember that one still often encounters these low go-to lazy platitudes surrounding opera, that it's outdated, it's irrelevant and elitist. Although, how can it be that class struggles, sexual politics, low corruption in high places, megalomania, rising and declining empires, duplicity, greed, intolerance, love and lust, often inappropriately expressed, vices, virtues, illness, death, war, wisdom, foolishness, comedy, and yes, love, both conditional and unconditional, redemption and freedom. How can that be thought as irrelevant? I really don't understand. After all, we've witnessed quite a few of these things on that list in the last lockdown year alone, so I'm pretty sure it's not outdated either. And as an art form, it is an art form really elitist just because it inspired some of our greatest poets, playwrights and composers to their greatest heights? If so, I'd be happy to concede that one, although I suspect the real problem is that opera is presented in a foreign language very often. There is certainly no elites or excluded minorities in the people who participate in opera either. You wouldn't get far staging without women, and all our productions have dozens of nationalities taking part, literally from all over the world, representing all ages between 8 and 80, and that is not uncommon at all. Engaging and energizing with our local community is another inspiring side effect of the staging opera locally, and that is certainly not elitist either. We have so many incredible people involved, not just singing and playing, but making props, making scenery, painting scenery, adjusting costumes, applying makeup, rigging lighting, and managing everything backstage. Now, when I was first taken to see opera as a child, it was quite a magical experience, and I'll never forget. when opera is done well, it is pretty damn amazing. It's hard to do well, and as I know now as a performer and a producer, it is also hard, sometimes rocket science hard, with a multitude of things that must come together with incredible precision and judgment, all more likely to go wrong than go right, even for the pros, let alone for those with limited time and resources. And as opera nurtures all the arts, the combination of skills required is immense. And I take my hat off to all my fellow artists, especially the ones who pursue opera singing as a professional career, and the combination of multidisciplinary talents, artistry, athletic fitness, determination, and endless patience, with no career path, regular income, or certainly no guaranteed prospect of promotion. But if and when you get it right, opera engages with everyone, and it's still the most amazing, magical, and fun experience I have ever known. However, not all agree, and I thought I'd leave you tonight with a few quotes, both for and against. I suppose one of the most famous ones was Dr. Samuel Johnson, who famously defined opera in the 18th century as an exotic and irrational entertainment. And there was Maria Callas, the famous singer, who said, "An opera begins long before the curtain goes up and ends long after it's come down. It starts in my imagination, it becomes my life, and stays part of my life long after I left the opera house." And then there was Sir Noel Coward. "People are wrong when they say that opera isn't what it used to be. It is what it used to be. That's what's wrong with it." And then Claude Debussy, the composer. "In opera, there is always too much singing." Other great composers also struggled with writing opera, including Schubert and Brahms, and even Beethoven, who, like Debussy, at least wrote one masterpiece of an opera. Then there's the novelist Robert Benchley. "Opera is when a guy gets stabbed in the back and instead of bleeding, he sings." Well, he obviously wasn't around, unfortunately, to see our production of Don Giovanni, because there was plenty of blood in that as well as plenty of singing. And then we have, from the 19th century, the novelist Flaubert, who said, "The finest things God created are the sea, Hamlet, and Don Giovanni." Interesting combination. And my own particular favorite by George Bernard Shaw, who said, "Opera is when a tenor and soprano want to make love, but are prevented from doing so by a baritone." And that happens in quite a few plots, I can tell you. So I think he nailed that one. Yeah. But finally, I'll leave you with W.H. Auden, who wrote the libretto for Stravinsky's opera, The Rake's Progress, and also, which is not often known, an excellent English translation of Don Giovanni. And he said, if it really was Queen Elizabeth who demanded to see Falstaff in a comedy, then she showed herself a very perceptive critic. But even in The Merry Wives of Windsor, Falstaff has not and could not have found his true home because Shakespeare was only a poet. For that, he was to wait nearly 200 years till Verdi wrote his last great opera, Falstaff. And Falstaff is not the only case of a character whose true home is in the world of music. Others are Tristan, Isolde, and yet again, Don Giovanni. I think I could add a few more to that as well. So there's some interesting quotes to leave you with. Thank you for listening. We hope we've talked ourselves out of lockdown persuasively, and that you'll enjoy us, join us rather, for some of our productions in this vital year of recovery. Details of which I'll say will soon be on our website at instantopera.co.uk. One of our very few highlights during the lockdown year was that we are thrilled to announce our new patron, Michael Rosewell, who, amongst many other things, is the director of opera at the Royal College of Music. And he will hopefully help us support and guide us out of lockdown as we come out of it. So should any of you also wish to support Instant Opera, whether artistically, technically, or financially, or in any other way, do please contact me, either again through our website or through Arts Richmond. We also always need good choral singers, both for our gala concerts and if you fancy getting on the stage, our stage productions too. Thank you very much and look forward to your questions later.
Thank you very much indeed, Nick. I'm wondering whether you're the unlucky bass or the interfering baritone. I'm not quite sure. But it's very interesting to hear you talk about opera. I think you said it's hard to do well, but in my view, there's nothing quite like it when it is done well. So it's great to hear you talk about our Richmond-based company like that. Can we move on to our final speaker this evening? Unless most of us, this particular gentleman doesn't need a great deal of introduction, and he's proved himself in the last few years a particularly important friend to Arts Richmond. I feel we've got to know Roger really, really well, and so grateful to him for the amount of time he's committed to our cause, particularly with our Roger Mcgough poetry competition. But Roger was born in Liverpool, as we know, of course, the author of over 60 books of poetry for adults and children, as well as editing numerous anthologies. As we heard from Vince, during the 60s, he was part of the Scaffold, whose song Lily the Pink was a hit worldwide, and the groundbreaking collection, The Mersey Sound, with Brian Patton and the late Adrian Henry, which has sold over 1 million copies, has been republished in the Penguin Modern Classic series. The winner of 2 BAFTAs for his film work and a Royal Television Society Award, he helped write the script for the Yellow Submarine animation film, and his recent adaptations of Molière's Tartuffe, the Hypochondriac, and the Misanthrope have been much acclaimed. He is president of the Poetry Society and a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. Roger is an honorary professor of Thames Valley University, a fellow of John Moores University in Liverpool, and has been awarded D.Lits from the universities of Hull, Liverpool, Nottingham, Roehampton, and the Open University. He was made a Freeman of the City of Liverpool in 2001 and received a CBE from the Queen in 2004 for services to literature. Currently, he presents Poetry Please on BBC Radio 4. And currently, he lives in Barnes and plays an enormous part in the arts locally. But Roger, we've invited you here this evening to talk to us about your lockdown, talking lockdown. So I invite you to our virtual platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hilary. And just say how really enjoyed listening to people talking. Wonderful. I just loved it. The passion there. And Geeta, thank you for reading my poem at the beginning. I didn't know you were born in Liverpool. Very good. Right, I'll start off, if I may, and tell my journey through lockdown, through poetry, which is a thing to do. It starts in December in 2019, actually. And at the end of the year, every year really, just after Christmas, I think about the year that's gone before, and I think about what we might expect from the year ahead. I've always done that, write a little poem. And often the image I use was a bicycle, like it's like a bicycle that's wheeled into the hall, and that's your bicycle for the new year. And so this is really written, as say, December 2019, thinking about the year ahead. Some questions regarding the new bicycle. What was it like for you when 2019 parked its bicycle in the hall? Did you take advantage? Go for a spin in the spring? Cut a swathe through leaves in the fall? Or did it get in the way? Add to the clutter of your life? Take up valuable room? A gift horse to bump into as you stumble from month to month in the thickening gloom? And what will you remember of 2019? A royal letting the side down? Brexit, Trump, democracy in reverse. Floods in Yorkshire, bushfires in Australia, riots in Hong Kong. Cheer up, it can't get any worse. Or can it? A planet feeling its age and under strain, as veering and out of control, 2020 comes careering down the lane. And then it careered down the lane, as well we know. And following a move into 2020, and I had a very full diary of gigs here and there, performances, looking forward to going everywhere and reading and meeting people and selling books and all them things. And in fact, my last performance, I didn't realize at the time, was to be in Liverpool. And it was to read poems to headmasters, headmistresses, heads of schools, and talk about education. Really, it was an educational thing in Liverpool at the museum. And I went up to Liverpool on the 10th of March. I stayed overnight. Next morning, did the reading at the museum, and then back home on the 11th. That happened to be the weekend that Atletico Madrid played Liverpool in the European Cup. And at the time, we already knew this because, as Gita said, we'd heard about Wuhan and what was there, but it all seemed to be far away. And then suddenly we heard about Spain getting the virus. And then, people started saying, should all these fans from Madrid be coming to Liverpool and England? But yeah, come on, it's only a football match. It's only a virus. Poof. And of course, we know what happened. I remember walking around Liverpool. It was great, full of Atletico fans, Spanish fans, and Liverpool fans, all enjoying themselves. The hotel was full, but there was a sort of air about something happening. And I remember on the train coming back, I got to London on the underground, coming back home to Barnes, and the tube was full. You know, people were sniffing, and you suddenly aware things are changing. And I wrote a little poem called "Safety in Numbers." Small. Safety in numbers, not anymore. The room starts to fill. I'm out of the door. That became the title of a book that I've published, coming out in November. And so I've been writing really about things happening in lockdown. And sometimes you get, overawed by it and frightened. Other times you try to cope with that. And one way of doing it is to be optimistic. So when we had to cancel a holiday, of course, my wife and I and the kids couldn't go away, couldn't go abroad. But I wanted to be, good, that's good. All the benefits of not having to go abroad. This is called, this summer, we will not be taking a holiday abroad. How good not to be waiting for the cab that will take us to the airport. Will the cat still be here when we get back? Is the house secure? How good not to be in line waiting to go through security. Why must I take my belt off? Are my shoes offensive? Do I look like a terrorist? Of course I understand, but really, how good to avoid the frenzy of boarding, the boredom of the inexplicable delay, the pain of feigning nonchalance, the practiced pretense of being engrossed in a novel. How I will miss the certainty of a bumpy flight, the possibility of death by fireball. How good not to be thankful for a safe arrival and the cab waiting to take us somewhere safe and sanitized, where we will throw away our masks and socially distance ourselves from survivors we half recognize from previous years. The same cab that would take us back to the airport, and a plane to another airport, and a cab to the house, and the cat who hadn't noticed our absence. How good. Of course, isolation, not much of a problem for me because I spend a lot of my time in isolation and, just on my own writing, so on and so on. But I realized, of course, it's very difficult for some people. For Sonia and everybody here, we've been talking, Nigel and Geisa talking about being isolated. It's very hard. And I think of other people who suffered, like burglars, prostitutes and adulterers. And so here's a poem called Adultery in Isolation. This is not the time for adultery. Your lover will fail to be impressed, not so much by the face mask and stale musk of sanitizing gel, but your flouting of the rules. Have you not listened to the radio, read the news, Has the Minister of Health been talking to himself? Does the 2-metre rule not apply to serial adulterers? Get a grip. Go home and self-isolate. Resort to self-abuse for all our sakes. And when the time comes and it's over, not soon enough, I imagine, for pickpockets, pole dancers, bouncers, drug dealers and the like, not to mention healthcare workers, nurses, doctors, kids, mums and dads, then and only then can you pick up the phone. Good luck. During the year, I got a book coming out in November this year, and I hope to be promoting it and be getting out and about, meeting people. But I had 2 books came out since the pandemic came down, 2 children's books. This is called, selling thing. It's a bit banal, really, but a book called Money Go Round, but 2 kids' books. Money Go Round, set in the wildwood with Toady and all that, and another lovely little book called Crocodile Tears, about a crocodile that ends away from the jungle. And it's lovely writing these books and getting them illustrated, and the excitement of it's going to come out, and I'll do some schools and book signings and read to kids. Of course, didn't happen. All cancelled. And I'm not very good on social media, so I'm sort of waiting for the books to be regenerated. But it got me thinking about someone who it's their first book. Sorry for me being at it for yonks, but a young writer maybe been writing these poems, and it's their first book's coming out, and their life depends on it really. And then there's bad timing. Bad timing. Oh, what dreadful timing. It couldn't have been worse for that long-awaited, groundbreaking volume of verse. A title to intrigue, an immaculate cover, author smiling on the back, then whoosh, it's all over. Your publisher hired a publicist to titillate the press. A review already promised in the TLS, no less. Fingers crossed for Waterstones and a window display. The launch at Covent Garden on the following day. A signing at Harrods, high up on your bucket list. Practicing your signature, you almost sprained your wrist. Then the poetry reading circuit, 50 mins plus Q&A. Dropping by bookstores and libraries on the way. A choice of literary festivals, Cheltenham, hey on Wye. Chats on local radio and hopefully on Sky. But what untimely timing, how could anybody guess? Your career as a poet would last an hour or less. A laureate in the making, surely next in line for the crown. Had your book not been released on the day the world shut down? There's 2 more poems ready. And this was a poem thinking about, back to the new normal, whatever that is, back to a newer normal, maybe. And it's a poem called When It's Over. What we have learned from stillness and silence, from sharing, not taking, waiting, not pushing, whispering, not shouting, dawdling, not rushing. When life is back to normal and the hugging is over, will we look beyond ourselves and help the earth recover? This morning, the only cloud on the horizon is a cloud. Without fear of intrusion, it drifts above, full of itself. The sky, has it had a facial? Its skin positively glows. Is it a bird? Is it a plane? Superman? No, just a bird. And on a branch, another one is singing. The purity of the note. No need today to clear its throat. If trees could smile, this one surely would. Imprisoned for our sins, is now the time to question why. When it's over, what lessons? Ask the tree, the bird, and the sky. And of course, what inevitably got me through lockdown, and most of my life has been poetry. And here's a little celebration of poetry. Of course, I had to lock down during lockdown. I was still doing Poetry Please. That was great, but instead of going into BH, I did it here. The BBC sent me a nice microphone, earphones, and I was able to talk to poets I would normally see, like Paul Muldoon out in New York, and other poets in Chicago. So it was quite nice, actually, quite good. But anyway, my last poem. Let's hear it for poetry. Let's hear it for poetry. The learning and the writing of it, the reading and the telling. For those who led us there, parents, friends, lovers and teachers. For the loan of a book, the ticket to a gig. A big hand for landscape. First frost in winter, full moon and rainbows, the heart that leaps, the eyes that behold. For suburbia, mown lawns and wisteria, pink and fully blown. Let us celebrate the desire to escape. Thumbs up for the city, its excitement and excesses, the late hours it keeps, the history beneath its feet. 3 cheers for the crowded room. Take the words by the hand, let them lead you into the dance. Let us celebrate the birth of the poem, the need to question, to inspire and create. Let us count the ways. Let us celebrate.
Thank you very much indeed, Roger. Such a privilege, actually, to have you in my my living room here. And it's just exciting listening to you and realizing, I've heard a lot about authors saying that, in fact, Sebba said to us, that lockdown had suited her really. She liked the quiet and the lack of kind of other demands on her time, and she could focus on her writing. And I'm just listening to you thinking it must actually be the most amazing thing to have this skill and to be able to use it in the way that you do to encapsulate what's happening around you in such an important and meaningful way for all of us. Yep. We have come now to the end of our 4 speakers giving their 4 talks, but I now invite you, if you haven't already done so, my members of our audience, to post questions for any or of our individual speakers as an individual or as a group, if you'd rather. And I'm now going to go to the Q&A function and just hopefully bring up the questions that people have already sent in. So I'll just take them as I find them from here. And if they're directed to a particular person, I'll mention it. And if not, then I will invite one of our 4 panelists to respond and see how we go with this. All right. The first question is from Anne Warrington, and it's to Geeta. Geeta, in your career, you have enjoyed an incredible range of experiences as both a reporter and presenter. What would you say is the most challenging aspect of your role and the most upsetting? Perhaps if there has been one. Is Geeta there? Could she come in to answer that?
Yes. Can you see me? Hear me?
Yes. Yes, I can. Thank you. Yes.
It's interesting, but I think it does go back actually in news. It is going back to the poem that I quoted. A lot of what we do is is in the sort of very difficult territory of people.
Has Geeta frozen?
The very first time that I had. Hear me? The very first time that I had to do something which was that lots of reporters have to do at the BBC in Leeds, and I had to knock on the door of a family whose daughter had been murdered, and we were covering the missing crime aspect of it, and the whole murder inquiry. It was the first time I ever had to do that, and it's a horrible thing to have to do. And they were so incredibly gracious, and they took me into their home, and we went back the next day and we filmed with them. And I'll never forget that, because in their sort of darkest hours, a young girl who'd lost her life for no reason walking home, they sort of trusted me to tell their story and to try and help them work with the police. And ultimately, the sort of the justification for doing that is to try and get something positive out of a very dark, the most dark situation that you can ever imagine. And I think that was the first time that I encountered that directly. I had to, come across many families who'd lost the worst sort of aspects of their life, the loved ones in their life. And as a presenter, one of the most difficult periods was actually 2014. There was a week when Israel and the Palestinians were, again in conflict. A lot of death and destruction at that point. There was the second, I think, of 2 plane crashes. If you remember the MH planes that one of them came down, I think, in the Ukraine. And all in the same week, the Yazidis were being targeted in Iraq. And those 3 stories ran together for 4 days. And we literally, it was absolutely horrific, because we were going from, one interview about something horrendous to another without stop. And I did that for 4 hours every day, rolling for 4 days. And when you're presenting, because you've got an earpiece on and you're in the studio, that's, you're seeing the pictures in very large scale and hearing the sound quite loud, it sometimes can physically go through you. You physically feel it. And I remember coming out of that week thinking, God, this is the worst of humanity. And so in those moments, I think that's when you feel it.
Do you ever struggle to control your emotional reactions to things when you're doing your job professionally like that?
I hope not. I think sometimes, all of us, when sometimes you will do an interview with somebody and it is very affecting. And sometimes you'll see a film for the first time. That there have been, films like that. I can think of more than one actually, which have been very, very affecting. And sometimes you'll get in touch with a correspondent afterwards and see if there's anything you can do to help. Yeah. You're just used to controlling it. I think, and also the directors are brilliant. If they can see that you're slightly welling up, which can happen, they will just pause before they come to you. They will pause the end shots of the image that they're on. They will note some pictures over you. So they're quite good at, they will work with you a lot. So they know. But hopefully, no, I think you're sort of in that professional zone, and so you're hopefully able to control it. Afterwards, you think about it, I think it sort of goes on in your head afterwards.
I must read other people's questions. Remember what I'm doing. One from Sue Pandit. She says, it's so interesting to hear how the numbers tuning into BBC News have increased so much over the pandemic. Certainly we in our house have watched much more news and regularly listened to podcasts like Newscast, Childhood Brexit Cast and so on. And do you think this trend will continue?
I think actually Brexit and COVID, as polarizing and horrible as each have been, in terms Brexit polarizing and COVID horrible. I think we know that audiences, it's told us that audiences still want to watch live television news, which is a lot, and want a human being to guide them through it. So for all the people who've been predicting the demise of television, that's been good. I think the polarization of Brexit has been countered a bit by COVID. And I hope that people have come back to the BBC and seen that we can be a unifying force in this country and around the world. As we were saying before, especially the whole fake news issue has really been, quite seismic.
Yes.
I think we know that audiences inevitably peak at big moments. So even in the last year, some of the events that I was talking about, with the biggest audiences come on the biggest days, and that's always going to be the case. And the challenge for the BBC and all broadcasters is to stay relevant, to adjust to young audiences who are obviously increasingly going towards digital news sources, whilst maintaining the loyalty of our existing audiences. And we hope that everyone keeps paying the license fee, because without that funding, we can't do what we do. So we hope that, obviously, I think it's been a great year in that people have been reminded of what we do well, I hope. And we hope that will have a lasting impact, but we'll have to see.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. A question for Sophie here from Sue. It's great to hear that The Dresser and Private Lives are coming in the autumn, but what's going to be your first production? Are you making changes to the seating? We heard last week that the Orange Tree have replaced or changed their seating quite dramatically. Do you want to respond to that, Sophie?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't yet confirm what our first production is. I'm actually having talks with some wonderful people about potentially doing something a little bit different as our first production from what we've currently got scheduled in. Our diary is very moving at the moment. As I mentioned earlier, those conversations with producers are still ongoing. And across ATG as a whole, they're having a sort of a staggered approach to how we're opening theatres. So I think we've got 7 theatres across, the West End and the regions that are opening this month, and then it sort of trickles on between July and October. So there's a real range of things. So not fully confirmed yet, but we hope that to be sort of pinned down in the coming weeks. Seats. Oh, I wish I could sit here and say, yes, we were having all our seats redone. As I think Vince mentioned earlier, Hilary, we had a large investment into Richmond Theatre the year before we shut. And therefore, there is no big plan to do anything there. There is a huge amount of work going into the theatre at the moment to repair certain aspects of things. There is a project we're doing at the moment, but it's actually to do with our lighting and a bit more of the technical side of things, so not so customer focused. So I apologise, it's not on the seats. But actually from the initial project we did a couple of years ago, there is still a bit of money that is still left over that we're hoping to do some of the sort of customer focused sort of fabric areas of the building. And that won't be happening until next year, but I'm still very hopeful that we'll be able to invest back into some of those front of house areas.
Right. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. A question for Nick here from Anne Warrington. Nick, thank you for that interesting overview of opera. I'd like to ask you how and when you first became interested in opera. What was it that first sparked your interest?
Right, well, thanks, Anne. It sounds a bit trivial after some of the things that Geeta was saying, but in my case, it was very young. I think I was a toddler, about 3, and I found the play button on my dad's, this big reel-to-reel kind of hi-fi tape recorder, and I just stabbed it like that. This music came out, which, captivated me right from the go. And the weird thing is although it was in a foreign language and I couldn't see what was going on, it made sense without seeing it. I think that's the key thing, that it kind of conjured up visions. So it just made sense just hearing it. So consequently, when I was dragged along to see an opera, I was probably about 7 then. I think it was just a GNS opera at Sadler's Wells. But it all kind of fell into place. It all made sense. Of course, this is what they should be doing because I know the music. So it all kind of fitted. And then after that, we were very fortunate. I had an uncle that used to have access to one of the boxes at Covent Garden. So we were dragged along as a family on a fairly regular basis to the Bedford box, and we saw everybody and everybody do everything. It's right above the orchestra as well. So you get this swell of sound coming up. You can watch the orchestra and the conductor as well as what's going on stage and hearing it. So the whole thing, you just get the whole thing right in your face and right in your ears. So that really put the cherry on the cake for me. All very young.
Yeah, thank you. And another question for you, Nick. This is from Asha. How many people were involved in instant opera on a regular basis? Were they all freelance, and what's happened to them over lockdown, which actually was kind of one of the questions that came up with the Orange Tree last week about young actors and, somewhat desperate circumstances. Indeed.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, our productions are quite, there are quite a lot of people involved. I think our last guy had 55. This is with the orchestra chorus, and we had 10 soloists. Our full productions, our last one was 77 people. That's also with the creators, because you need people to manage behind stage and do lights and stuff like that. So all in, that was 77 people, as I say, playing to an audience, and not much more. The chorus are usually friends or community-based friends that are sort of in Richmond or around, and so very often are the orchestra members. They're often teachers and graduates and some people in the early part of their career. The principals, for the first time, we held an audition, and to our astonishment, they came in literally from all over the world. Brazil, United States, Japan. We had them queuing around the corner. That amazed me, actually. Now they all came to Richmond like that, and of course they did subsequently for all the rehearsals. Now they're usually freelance. They're often again at the beginning of their careers and graduates, but they're very often freelance. What happened to them? Well, I'm about to find out as we're trying to put everything back on again. you know, I know some of them around. Everyone's been trying to survive and dig in like we all have. And it's been, you know, people have done that with varying degrees of success. Was there a question about streaming there as well?
Yes, absolutely. I think, yes. I've lost it from my screen, but it did say something about, were you thinking about like a streaming? Yes.
We've been thinking about it, and we still are thinking about it. I think it's quite difficult because there's a lot of sound and a lot of people to get into a small kind of letterbox. And there's issues around quality, sound quality and stuff like that. I think you need good equipment, people who know what they're doing, because it's getting good now, and a good budget to really do it convincingly. Not that many people I know have put opera up here yet, but it's something we consider because it is getting very good. The other thing, opera is often very context sensitive. So it's essentially a live experience. I think it was Gita and somebody else who mentioned the feeling, the 7:30 feeling, and Sophie as well, as, you know, when the curtain's about to go up, and in our case, when the orchestra is warming up, you get a buzz when that happens. And trying to replicate that on Zoom or whatever it is, it's kind of, you know, it's very context sensitive. So yeah, it is something we're thinking about, but we haven't quite grasped that one yet. But, you know, watch this space.
Thank you.
Hopefully we won't need Zoom. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. So much to think about. It's extraordinary, isn't it? Yeah. A question from Juggy for you, Roger. Juggy says, love your lockdown poems. They really capture how we have been feeling over recent months. And how has isolation affected your creativity in a positive or negative way?
I think, Juggy, thank you for the question. Yeah, probably, you know, to be honest with you, when you get to my age, you know, which I don't go out very much, and so chase around like go to the pub and I meet my friends, but it wasn't difficult for me in a sense. And I also not to have to go to sometimes book launches, not to have to go to sometimes dinner parties where you didn't really, enjoyable, but sometimes quite enervating, really. You know what I mean? So standing back from all that, thinking all I can do is sit here and write and do that stuff. And what I did find was I rewrote a lot of work that I wouldn't normally do, because normally I'm writing and then I'm going to performing. So you write a poem and you finish it and you go off and then you come back, start another poem. Whereas now I was just like spending the time on writing that poem, getting that right. I'd also what we call sort of go back and to what I'd written perhaps years ago and even published years ago, looked at it again and thinking, no, this wasn't right. This could be this way. So you know, it's very good, like, you know, slaving away, going into an old rock place and going in and chipping away at it, rewriting, revising, spending more time on it, getting it right. Yeah. Hopefully, even getting it right, as far as I'm concerned. Who's to say? Yeah. I think so. You know, that was really good. I enjoyed that. And at the end of the day, what are you writing for? You know, hoping that someone who will see it at some point, and at some point you'll have an opportunity to go out, as I will on the Sunday coming to the OSO, where my first performance forever will be in a local audience where I shall throw poems at them. Yeah,
absolutely. Will there be a collection of lockdown poems, Roger?
I hope there's a collection of money afterwards. That's what I'm
hoping. Sadly, perhaps not.
No.
Just another question that's come up here for you, Roger, and from Anne, and she says, Roger Moore, beautifully worked out and written poems. I'd like to ask you who you would consider the most influential person in your early life who fostered your love of poetry.
You know, it's funny because I often ask that question, and it's often people, when I hear people give an answer, it's usually a teacher at school. They remember very fondly some teacher who inspired them, and I had none of that at all. There were no inspirational teachers at school, unfortunately. So when I went out, I got scrambled through school and got to Hull University to do French and geography, having failed English literature O level. even though I liked English language like that, but I didn't read the books. I didn't get through the Thomas Hardy, so I failed English. Went to university, did French and geography. Philip Larkin was the sub-warden of the hall I was in. So I was 17, and there was Larkin walking, this big guy walking a tall, like a swaying steeple, a tweed steeple. And people said, he's poet, Philip Larkin. So I started to read his work, and I didn't talk to him. Wouldn't even know what to say. You know, I didn't know the questions, and I think he was, despite his image, he's quite a kind bloke. But I didn't say that. But poets like Christopher Lowe came to read later on, age in which I saw people reading, performing their poems, and I realized, and the American poets. Prior to this, I always thought poets were up there somewhere and a bit posh and a bit, you have to have been to Cambridge and, you know, in a sense, wrong. And you didn't have to, but you could be. I don't know. And then I just stumbled into it, really. Rather the way Nick said, you went to Nick instinct, you're very young into an opera. But when you're a poet, you don't really get brought into it until you're much older, I think. Anyway, there you go.
No, thank you very much indeed. Geeta, could I ask you this question here from Jean? She asks, are your interviewees given tips on how to look as good as possible on Zoom for broadcast?
Sadly not. Very good idea. I think I should start a business, or ask my husband to add it onto his writing business. Tips for Zoom. No, we don't. I mean, I think that you hear them when they're lining people up in the gallery. You can hear them just saying, kind of point the camera down or point it up, and you can see, I think my background here is completely dark, so that's how good I am at it. But it is all to do with sort of getting the lighting right, sort of soft and flattering, and being smartly dressed. Tailoring always helps. So if you're a bloke, wear a jacket. You know, one of us wear a tailored top. Single colours. It's the same rules as being a TV presenter, a TV newsreader. Really, you know, single colours are flattering. Anything which has got too much pattern or fuss on it can be distracting. Make sure your hair is well groomed. Mine is never, and that's why we're all missing the makeup artists. Yeah, it's kind of looking smart and looking at the framing behind you. And it's combination things. It's been fascinating, hasn't it? Watching everything.
I quite like having the things behind you to take your eyes off me, you know, so the viewers looking down there, oh, that's nice, you know, the right, that's getting away from.
But it's very interesting to me sitting here because we have the lockdown bookcases in your two instances. And I think there's a slight indication of personality, I would say, you know, from what I can see, but I won't go any further than that.
I'm in my son's study, I should say. That's where these are all his books.
Oh,
it's interesting sometimes when you can read the title of the book. Yes. It's quite revealing.
Yeah. The meaningful.
That's why mine are a long way back.
Right. Great. Okay. And oops, sorry, I've lost my questions again. Vince, I just wondered, Vince, if you want to come in to have a conversation with any of our speakers here.
No, I'd actually just like to thank them. I thought it was just a wonderful evening. When I go out on my spin in spring tomorrow morning, I'll think about my bicycle in a completely new way. And but you know, we're getting to the point of when it's over, but we haven't quite got there yet. So we've got another week of festivities. And perhaps, Hilary, if it's okay with you, I'll just briefly summarize that.
Absolutely, thank you.
We've got Kate Silverton, who most people will know from the 10 o'clock news, Strictly Come Dancing as well. And she's produced a book, which is titled There's No Such Thing as Naughty, which for those of us as being parents will be quite a hard sell, I think. But anyway, look forward to it. Susie Rowland, the author. Barry Metayard, who does a workshop called Ignite Me. I'm afraid I haven't come across it before, but I look forward to learning about it. And Leslie Bassine, who is from the Landmark Centre, which I think, as many of you know, does mixtures of production and exhibitions. And actually, at least 2 of the things behind me actually came out of the art exhibition at the Landmark Centre. So we look forward to that. I'll thank the speakers and thank the audience who joined us for a second week. And for those people who want to find out a bit more about Arts Richmond, we're www.artsrichmond.org.uk. And with that, I'll bow out and
thank you.
To you, Hilary.
Thank you very, very much indeed. I just wonder if I could ask Roger. I know it's a bit of a cheek, Roger, but I would love you to wind up our evening for us with another poem.
Can't I sing Lily the Pink? Can't I sing Lily the Pink?
Yeah. Actually, I could.
No. That'd be great.
Actually, no, because I could sing Lily the Pink. And what I need from you is a poem. But I just, could you indulge me by just reading your Safety in Numbers one again? I know it's just 2 lines.
Oh, easy, yes. Oh, yeah, good. 4 lines, yeah. There we go. Safety in numbers, not anymore. The room starts to fill. I'm out of the door.
That's the one. That is the one. Thank you very much.
Right?
Actually, that really does sum up how I felt. I couldn't believe really the degree of tension that you feel in that kind of situation, don't you? Just suddenly being surrounded by people when you've been very, very much on your own for months on end. That's great. And I don't know whether you have a longer one that you would actually end.
I have, but I'll start to bore you. I think I'll just bore you.
I'm not bored. But before you do, I'll give you a second or 2 to find something wonderful and appropriate, and just say a huge, huge thank you to our speakers this evening. That's Geeta and Sophie and Nick and Roger. Wonderful contributions from you all. Thank you very, very much indeed. And I do hope our audience have enjoyed listening to you as much as I have. We're enormously grateful to Vince for being the host for this series of talks and look forward to seeing him again next week, introducing the speakers he mentioned. And I would just like to thank a couple of other people. And one is Sue Pandit, whose idea this was, and there's a lot of work gone in to bringing you wonderful people together. And the final person is to Linda Hansel, whom you can't see because she looks like a white swan on a blue background, but she is actually, oh, there she is.
Hey.
The technical wizard behind everything that we're doing here this evening, apart from a great deal else besides, but for this evening. So, Roger, could I ask you to wind up this evening for us? And
you can.
And
thank you, Hilary. Thank you for being a wonderful host. And here's a poem called Anybody There? There are times when I feel I'm not real, not made out of flesh, but thin air. Surrounded by friends who don't notice, listen, or let alone care. When I told my therapist this morning, she turned and said, anybody there?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, it's very weird doing these things because you're not sure that anybody is there, are you?
No, exactly.
I just think, I hope they are and that they've enjoyed this evening. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you all.
See you again soon.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.